What I want to do in this video is influence you, challenge you to enlarge your worldview massively. Now, stick with me here because some of you will not like the next sentence that I say. I am going to try to talk you into reading a portion of the most beloved book in the world and the most hated book in the world. I want you to read the four Gospels in the New Testament of the Bible. Stay with me, at least for a minute. I'm not going to evangelize to you. I'm not going to try to convince you to believe in God. I'm not going to try to save you, and I'm definitely not going to try to condemn you. You want proof that the Gospels are true, and I get that. Anytime we're presented with something new or some revolutionary new idea, we want concrete proof. And the way we get concrete proof is through the scientific method. It must be observable. It must be measurable. It must be repeatable. That's how we do it in the scientific community. But that's not how we do it in the historical community. History is never proven true through the scientific method. It's proven true through eyewitnesses. Now, the Civil War was almost 200 years ago. Nobody doubts that it happened. The Revolutionary War was farther back than that. Nobody doubts that it happened. And we don't doubt it because of the eyewitnesses that were present at the time witnessing these events. The Gospels, I would argue, are accurate historical documents written by eyewitnesses during the lifetimes of hundreds, probably thousands, of other eyewitnesses. And this is important. This is important. These are eyewitness accounts that are in the Gospels. But are these accounts really reliable? Let's find out by comparing the accounts and the historical breadcrumbs, if you will, of these accounts, compared to other accounts that everybody universally accepts in the ancient world. So, no one doubts the historicity of Julius Caesar's Gallic Wars. We have, to support the Gallic Wars by Julius Caesar, we have 10 ancient manuscripts that confirm the accuracy of history. The oldest documented account was written 900 years after the events of this moment in history. Aristotle's Poetics, we have 5 manuscripts. The earliest was written 1,400 years after Aristotle put feather, I guess, to paper, or feather to papyrus, I suppose it was. The writings of Herodotus, this is the father of ancient history. We have less than 10 manuscripts. The writings of Homer, we have less than 10 manuscripts, ancient manuscripts. The New Testament and the Gospels are supported by nearly 6,000 ancient manuscripts, about 5,800 to be precise. And some of these manuscripts date back to earlier than 120 AD. This is a matter of decades after these events happened. So, are the Gospels accurate eyewitness accounts? I'll let you decide, but my conclusion is yes, they are. Now, let's look at some of these accounts of Jesus. And how do we know that these accounts are accurate, that they haven't been corrupted over time through translation and interpretation and nefarious motives? The Ryland's Papyrus, and the papyrus is the scroll that they used to write on, dates back to 150 to 200 AD, and it contains the Gospel of John. And there are no discernible errors in what we currently read to this writing. We have a papyrus written of the Gospel of Matthew from 150 to 200 AD. We have fragments of John's Gospel from 150 to 200 AD. We have the Chester Beatty papyrus of the Pauline epistles of Romans and Hebrews from 175 to 225 AD. The Bodmer papyruses, one is from 175 to 225 AD, contains large portions of Luke and John. In that same set, we have a document from 200 to 225 AD that contains most of the Gospel of John. And in all of these documents, there is no discernible error to present-day interpretation or writings of these scriptures and the Gospels. So, yeah, I think we could argue that there's a very strong likelihood that these accounts are accurate. So let's take a few moments and explore what happened to these witnesses. Now, there were thousands of witnesses of Christ's ministry, but the ones I want to key in on are the 12 disciples of Christ. The 12 eyewitnesses lived with Jesus for about 3 years, and they were all horribly executed over time. They were executed because they did not deny their belief in how Jesus lived, in what he did, what he taught, and his supernatural acts. They would not refute it. They wouldn't refute their witness, so they were killed. Now, is this the behavior of a bunch of liars? Who dies for a lie? Let's find out what's going on here. So Simon Peter was crucified upside down in 64 to 67 AD. Upside down because he didn't feel worthy to die in the same manner that Christ died. So he asked them to turn the cross upside down. Andrew was crucified in an X-shaped cross in 60 to 70 AD. James was beheaded with a sword in 44 AD. John died of natural causes after a long imprisonment on the island of Patmos in 98 to 100 AD. He's the only apostle that was not martyred. Philip was crucified or beheaded, we're not quite sure, in 80 AD. Bartholomew was flayed alive and beheaded in 70 AD. Thomas was stabbed with a spear in 72 AD. Matthew was stabbed and beheaded in 60 to 70 AD. James was clubbed or stoned to death in 62 AD. Thaddeus was killed by arrows or clubbed, not quite sure, in 65 to 72 AD. Simon was crucified or he was sawn in half, crucified or sawn in half from between 65 and 74 AD. Judas Iscariot was the betrayer of Jesus, and he offed himself in 30 to 33 AD, either by hanging or falling off a cliff. Matthias was stoned and beheaded in 70 to 80 AD. If they were trying to deceive the world that the Son of God came down to save the world, who would they present if they were lying? Would they not present a man of strength, someone to come and conquer? Instead, they presented a mild-mannered man who wanted to love his enemies, turn the other cheek, taught that you should give away everything that you have and give it to the poor. And he ended up being tortured and crucified by the religious elite in Jerusalem and the Roman authorities. Is this how the majestic King of Heaven and the Son of God should act in someone's imagination to try to motivate the ancient world into victory? It doesn't make any sense. It's widely accepted that Jesus fulfilled prophecies. The number that most people agree on is about 300. Some scholars make the argument that he fulfilled 570 or so prophecies. Here's the kicker in my mind. Even traditional Judaism, they don't even believe in Jesus, but they agree that Jesus fulfilled between 20 and 30 prophecies from the Old Testament. They don't even believe in Jesus. Now, to give you an idea of what this means. There's a mathematician named Peter Stoner, and he said fulfilling just 8 of these prophecies has the likelihood or the probability of 10 to the 17th power, which I'm not a mathematician, but that's a staggering number. And he says it's equivalent of covering Texas with a 2-foot pile of silver coins, marking one of them, blindfolding somebody and asking him to go find the marked coin, and he picks it the first time. It's virtually impossible. So let's talk with a little bit more detail on these prophecies. The prophecy that really gets me comes from Psalm 22. Now, Psalm 22 was written by King David, who reigned approximately from 1010 to 970 BC. And in Psalm 22, he writes that the Messiah's hands and feet were pierced. And nobody knew what this meant when he wrote it. It didn't make any sense, because this was written before crucifixion even existed. The Romans didn't start implementing crucifixion until the 6th century BC. So the Jews had absolutely no idea why someone's hands and feet would be pierced. It wasn't a form of torture. It wasn't a form of cruelty. It wasn't a form of death. It made no sense. But yet, that's what happened when Jesus was crucified. Jesus' life fulfilled prophecy from the Old Testament books of Genesis, Isaiah, Psalms, Micah, Daniel, Jeremiah, Malachi, Deuteronomy, and Zechariah, and I'm probably missing 1 or 2. These were all written 600 to 1500 years before Jesus was even born. In addition to the crucifixion, here are just a few more of the prophetic highlights that Jesus fulfilled. He would be a descendant of Abraham in Genesis. He would be a descendant of Isaac in Genesis. He would be a descendant of Jacob in Numbers. He was from the tribe of Judah from Genesis. The slaughter of children of Israel would precede his ministry, Jeremiah. I'll stop reading the books. His way would be prepared for, and he would be preceded by a messenger. That refers to John the Baptist. His ministry in Galilee. He would speak in parables. He would be rejected by his own people. He would be betrayed for 30 pieces of silver. He would be born in Bethlehem. He would have a triumphal entry into Jerusalem. He would be adored by children. He would be betrayed by a close friend. He would be accused by false witness, spat on and struck, hated without reason, present a vicarious sacrifice, crucified with 2 criminals, pierced through his hands and feet, pierced in the side of his body, sneered at and mocked. He would pray for his enemies. Soldiers would gamble for his clothing. He would be forsaken by God. Not a bone in his body would be broken. Now, I'm going to pause there. In crucifixion, if they wanted somebody to die quickly, they would break their legs, okay? Because then they couldn't lift themselves up to breathe, so they would suffocate. That didn't happen with Jesus. They didn't break a bone, which was very unusual, actually. In fact, if I'm remembering correctly, the 2 thieves that he was on the cross with had their legs broken, but they left Jesus intact. He was buried in a rich man's tomb, and he was resurrected from the dead. These are just 28 of the 300 or so prophecies that Jesus fulfilled. Again, what you think of the Gospels is up to you. I'm not telling you what to believe. I am giving you a historical background to the potential impact of your worldview of these books, of these accounts. I just want you to read them. I'm not trying to convince you of anything. I just want to motivate you to read them. So which gospel would you start at? There's the Gospel of Matthew, Gospel of Mark, Gospel of Luke, and the Gospel of John. So I'm going to run down each of these testimonies of Jesus, and I'm going to let you decide. So Matthew was a Jewish tax collector. That's a hated role in culture at the time, but one that was very prosperous because they were traditionally very corrupt. And he left his prosperous living to follow Christ. It was written just a few decades after the death of Jesus, and he was an eyewitness to the life and teachings of Jesus. It was written before the sacking of Jerusalem by the Romans and before the destruction of the temple in AD 70. This is a very recent account of Jesus. It has a Jewish flavor. It was aimed at demonstrating that Christ was their expected king and Messiah that would come and save Israel. And it quotes more than 60 Old Testament prophetic passages fulfilled by Jesus. It has Jesus' genealogy all the way back to Adam documented. And it explores the attacks on Jesus by the Jewish leadership more than any other gospel. So that's Matthew. The Gospel of Mark was written between AD 50 and AD 70. Mark was an interpreter of Peter. He was not a direct eyewitness, but he was a very close companion of a direct eyewitness. And Justin Martyr called the book of Mark the memoirs of Peter. So he was really speaking for Peter when he wrote this gospel. Mark targeted an audience of the Romans, otherwise known as the Gentiles. So he left out a lot of the information that was included in Matthew that would be of interest to the Jewish population. Mark focused on the deeds of Jesus more than his teachings, and demonstrated Jesus' humanity more than any of the other authors of the Gospels. He emphasized Jesus' human limitations and emotions. It's a terrific gospel. Luke, which is, I have trouble deciding between Luke and John in terms of my favorite, but Luke is definitely a good one. Luke was a Gentile. He wasn't Jewish. And he was a close companion of the Apostle Paul, who wrote 13 of the 27 books of the New Testament. So he was the assistant. He was very close to the number one guy that gave us the New Testament. Luke was a physician, and he talks a lot about the miraculous healings of Jesus. He wrote the book of Acts, which is the historical document of the history of the early church. So he was very prolific in terms of his contributions to the New Testament. The accepted time of authorship of the Gospel and the book of Acts, which were written in close proximity to one another, is approximately 60 to 62 AD. Again, before the destruction of the temple and the sacking of Jerusalem by the Romans. Luke clearly states that the events he recorded in this Gospel came from reports of those who were eyewitnesses. So again, to be totally honest, he was not a direct eyewitness, but he was surrounded by them. Luke clearly states that the events he recorded in this gospel came from reports who were eyewitnesses. His literary style, particularly in the narrative of Jesus' birth, also known as the Christmas story or the Nativity, that comes from the book of Luke, is very polished and very eloquent. It's a beautiful read, as is the whole book. Luke emphasizes Jesus' compassion for the Gentiles, the Samaritans, women, children, tax collectors, sinners, and outcasts of Jewish society. It's a very compassionate gospel. Now, the Gospel of John. John is known as the disciple that Jesus loved. And he wrote his gospel between 80 and 90 AD as a direct witness of Jesus' ministry. He was there. He was aware of the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke because he was the last one to write a gospel account. So in being aware of these books at the time of his writing, he makes a unique record of Jesus that was designed to be supplemental to the other three Gospels. John's Gospel is often referred to as the spiritual gospel, and I think that is dead on. It's a very spiritual book, and it focuses on information that helps the reader understand the events of the other Gospels from a theological perspective. His purpose was both evangelistic and apologetic, centering on the life and work of Jesus Christ, of Jesus as the Christ, and Jesus as the Son of God, and has the supporting theme of salvation in Jesus. Again, not trying to convince you of anything. I just want you to read them. They're fascinating just from a literary standpoint. But I make this argument that the Gospels are historical documents. They were written by people that were eyewitnesses or surrounded by eyewitnesses of Jesus' ministry, his short 3-year ministry. They're supported by nearly 6,000 Greek manuscripts, more than any other historical account. No other historical account has the breadth of historical, manuscript library that the Gospels do and the New Testament does, and the Bible as a whole, for that matter. The Gospels we read today are so close to the ancient manuscripts that were written at the time, within just a few decades of the happenings that they're writing about. There are no discernible errors. If you take today's gospel and compare it to the papyrus scrolls that we have from a few decades after the originals were written, there's virtually no difference. And everyone was expecting to find differences. They couldn't. The 12 disciples all died horrible deaths because of their refusal to recant what they believed. And between 300 and, say, 550 prophecies were fulfilled by Jesus. So that's my argument as to why you should expand your worldview by reading these 4 accounts. Jesus was a man who had more impact on the world, more impact on humanity than any other. Nobody can argue that. His impact on the world was based on love, forgiveness, humility, sacrifice, charity. But it was also based on boldness, steadfastness, and an unwavering character. He didn't falter. He didn't change. My plea for you is to invest 5 hours into reading less than 65,000 words. That's what we're looking at. 4 Gospels, 65,000 words, about 5 hours of reading for the average reader. And you will be able to expand and enlarge your worldview beyond anything else you can do in 5 hours of your time. You may read them and not believe. You may read them and believe. You may read them and just enjoy them. It's not up to me. And that's not what I'm trying to convince you of or change in your heart. But if you have not read the Gospels, you really need to. You need to understand this story, and you need to read them as historical accounts of a man who lived 2,000 years ago and utterly flipped the world on its head. That's what I have today. God bless you all, and I hope to see you again soon.